Baltimore Ravens coach. Pretty cool for the Harbaughs in Michigan getting it done. Hey, good morning, New Hampshire. This is one of those shows where I like to say is like a pilot on one of these planes, but hopefully the door doesn't fly off while we're up in the air at 16 to 20,000 feet. Is buckle up. We're going to get you out in the tarmac because we have a pack show for you. Mother Nature doing her thing starting really pretty much tonight into tomorrow. Things warm up, but a lot of rain and a lot of wind coming up. We're going to hear from William Hinkle at Eversource in a little bit. They're already making some preps with the snow on the branches and the rain if we have some power outages. Also, tightening poll numbers. You're not going to believe this one. If you believe the polls, latest poll showing a 7-point race now in the race for the Republican primary trophy here and the first real votes of the nation here in New Hampshire's first in the nation presidential primary. Just 2 weeks from today, Nikki Haley closing the gap. If you believe this poll, latest poll out, by 32%, Donald Trump at 39%, followed by Chris Christie at 12, and then it tapers right off. So we're going to hear from Governor Chris Sununu in a moment on this and a whole lot more. And how about this one? It's not every day you see this. The Attorney General of the state of New Hampshire sending a cease and desist letter to the Democrat National Committee, the DNC, saying, hey, stop trying to suppress the vote here in New Hampshire. Like it or not, we're going to vote first, whether you like it or not, 2 weeks from today. Of course, Iowa starts the process before New Hampshire. Let's get right to the newsmakers before we bring on Eversource. Governor Chris Sununu joining us live. Good morning, New Hampshire, the Pulse of an H on this Tuesday morning. Governor, good morning. Well, there's a lot going on. You're the chief executive. I'm just the show host. Where do you want to start? What about these polls? Is the race tightening this much, or are these polls? There's some dueling polls. Another poll shows it's still a double-digit lead for Trump. Right. Well, Governor, I'm just going to be totally candid. If anyone is an architect, politically speaking, of New Hampshire's voting bloc or voters in elections these days, it's you. You've had four successful gubernatorial election victories. You've appealed in the past independents, moderates, some moderate Democrats, and Republicans. And my question constantly of these so-called experts we have on, the pundits and the analysts, is this: are independents going to vote 2 weeks in New Hampshire's primary? Are they going to take part or are they not? Because in primaries, independents typically don't vote as much as they do in a general election. So that's the big question I have. And that seems to be a voting block that you and Nikki Haley and this pack on her behalf are going after. Are independents going to vote? Wow. Now, Governor, you were recently in Iowa campaigning for the candidate you've endorsed in this primary, that being Nikki Haley, of course. What are you sensing there? Because what I've seen Governor Sununu in the past, going back to a lot of cycles, is what happens in Iowa stays in Iowa. So, in other words, whatever happens in the caucus process, the winner doesn't. Some candidates have invested their time; they're hoping it translates into a New Hampshire primary victory. Your father, John Sununu Sr., knew that firsthand because he took Vice President Bush, who didn't do well in Iowa, comes in here and wins the primary. So it doesn't always transfer. What did you see? What are you sensing in Iowa? And if you had to say today, does Trump grab the headline out of Iowa into New Hampshire or not? Right. Okay. Okay. Real quickly, if and it's an if Nikki Haley pulls off an upset in New Hampshire's first in the nation presidential primary, even by a point or two, like a field goal. If she pulls off an upset here, how big of a story is this to Donald Trump in terms of his quest for the nomination? Right. Ri Last question at this point. We'll get you on again before the primary. Governor Chris Sununu live. Good morning, New Hampshire, on the pulse of New Hampshire, our network of news talk stations. The Attorney General, this letter to the Democrats here in New Hampshire from two members, ranking members of the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, basically saying it's detrimental for Democrat or likely Democrat voters to vote and participate in our own primary in 2 weeks. It's detrimental to the process. Why? What is going on here? Governor Kristen live. Good morning, New Hampshire. Thanks for the time. All right, when we come back, we're going to hear from one of the leading Democrat state senators right here in the Granite State, the Capital Region senator, talking about the agenda the Democrats have as they roll it out this morning. Hey, Google, hey, Alexa, play the pulse of an H. Tenny Mountain, the official ski area of Good Morning, New Hampshire. They're cranking up, had a big weekend there last weekend. We're going to hear from our friends at Eversource as well on some storm prep going on. Back on Good Morning, New Hampshire, the pulse of an H in a moment. Well, and this is a model I wish we could share in the country. And I mean this sincerely. Just a quick comment before bringing our next guest who has a busy morning at the state Senate. We, one thing we do differently here, Good Morning New Hampshire, the Pulse of a Nation. Number one, we're on more stations now, News Talk wise, 9 to noon. The Pulse app and people streaming nationally. We have thousands of folks in the morning. But we have both sides. Yesterday, we had Representative Dean Phillips on. He's a Democrat running for president. We'll have Nikki Haley on the other day. We'll have candidates on. We just had Governor Chris Sununu. That's what we do here. And every Friday, of course, we have State Senator Lou D'Alessandro, who's just an amazing individual. I call him the Lion of the Senate, leading Democrat, and also Jeb Bradley. And we just talk, and that's what's missing nationally. If we could have more civic discussions, it would be maybe your blood pressure would come down. That's commentary. All right, 603-228-2080. I want to bring in now someone who has a busy morning, as I said, and one of the state senators, J Dog. I guess she's your senator because you're here in the Capitol. We have Senator Whitley joining us, and I just want to pull up from a good friend of mine, Lucas Meyer, who's a regular contributor. They're setting their caucus, their Senate caucus is rolling out their agenda for actually the session, and it's a pretty good time to get on the state senator. And she joins us now as we get going. Senator, thanks so much for being with us. Well, what are the priorities? There's so much attention right now, nationally on all the national stuff, all the noise happening out there. But what's the priority here, right here at home? Because what happens in the state senate and the House is really what local voters, that's what they should be paying attention to. Well, let's talk. Another thing we don't hear. Well, we should hear. What about the cost of housing, affordable housing? You're listening to Senator Becky Whitley. I think you've been serving what since 2020. Is that right? State senator from the Capitol. What about we Congress in general, Senator? I think you'd agree with me nationally, it's just so it's I think a lot of people are down on Washington in general. They just don't feel it really works well for them. And there's a lot of special, powerful interests, and so much seems to be almost in some respects, not literally, maybe not bought and paid for. But here in New Hampshire, we try and do things more in a civil way, in a civic way. And I'm just wondering, kind of what is the working relation? What's the mood? What's the morale in the state house and the state senate, for example, under Senate President Jeb Bradley? I mentioned Senator D'Alessandro earlier. Do you have do you have a good rapport with your Republican colleagues, or is it as divisive as we may not see it almost nationally? Are things that split? Do you are you interested? Are you have you made an endorsement? Are you we just had Governor Sununu on, of course, he's endorsed Nikki Haley on the Republican side. We're 2 weeks to go before New Hampshire's primary. There's this sort of side controversy going on because you and I know, I think most of my listeners know the DNC and the president chose not to put New Hampshire first. So they're trying to sort of ignore what happens in New Hampshire. Any reaction to this letter the DNC apparently wrote to Ray Buckley, the executive director? I know the attorney general has sent back a letter to the DNC, basically stick your nose out in New Hampshire. People are going to vote here. Do you have any thoughts on any of this flap? Do you, as a write-in type situation? Right, Senator Becky White with Capital Region conquered since 2020. Talking about the Senate caucus, the Democrats, their agenda for the next session, I guess, and going forward. Thank you, Senator. All right, take a quick break. We are going to hear in a few moments from Eversource. We do have this is a really kind of it's actually kind of interesting. It's kind of weird. I mean, this past weekend was what I call a real good coastal nor'easter type snowstorm, at least on the coast. I mean, we saw over a foot. It really lived up to it was a good one. I mean, I got to be honest, I'm always impressed by what Mother Nature can do and very respectful. So it was a good one. And now tonight and tomorrow, the forecast. Are you ready for this one tomorrow morning where it's been kind of chilly in the mornings and right through the weekend with that snow? It's going to be mild. I think near 50 tomorrow in parts for a high. Windy. Some of these wind gusts on the coast are calling for 40, 45 mile per hour wind gust. And where this system is coming from, J-Dog, I don't know if you've seen different parts of the country. They're looking at almost 70, 65 mile per hour wind gust. But we're getting other places, coming up in the country where the air staying cooler are getting snow. We're getting rain, all rain tonight and tomorrow morning, heavy rain. Yeah, and what they're concerned about, J-Dog, is where you have some of the snow. Now I'm not the expert. William Hinkle's calling in a few moments from Eversource. But during a storm where you get the wet, heavy stuff and the snow on the branches, that's when you get a lot of the limbs that will come down as much as the utilities try to clear the lines. And once they come down on a power line here and there, all of a sudden you get power outages, plural. And that's happens. Fortunately, I may be wrong because the snow we just had was a few days ago. A lot of the areas, the snow's kind of already had a time to come off the leaves, off the branches. But in areas where it hasn't, you pour a bunch of rain tonight and tomorrow on that snow, and I think Eversource is taking this seriously. I'm gonna come back with that. But we have some super duper politics to talk about this morning. Before we get to that real quick, I'll tee this one up. We've already had Governor Chris Sununu. Now, J-Dog, you know sports. He talked about the Washington quarterback last night, even though they came up short versus Michigan. Michigan, the champs. Is he an NFL? Does he? Is he? Just talk. You gave some analysis earlier. You're already talking about this weekend in terms of the playoffs, the wild card, but you don't get into the nooks and crannies on the political side. Governor Sununu just made a prediction on the show here. Good morning, New Hampshire. The Pulse of Nature with me a few moments ago because the primary J Dog is 2 weeks from today. We're talking 2 weeks from today. And this latest UNH poll that shows Nikki Haley within striking distance of Donald Trump is rather significant. 7 points now. Trump down to, in that 30s, Nikki Haley within striking distance, and everyone else except for Christie at 12% drops right up. The question is, are these polls accurate? Are they real? But Governor Sununu's prediction that more than 40% of open undeclared voters are going to take part. 40. That's a big number. That happens. This primary 2 weeks from now is up in the air. That does not happen. Trump comes away with a win. I mean, it's really, if you want to boil it down, that simple. Remember, we're going to be broadcasting live from the West Wing Institute of Politics, St. Anselm College, on the morning of and the evening. We have a great panel of political analysts and all-stars. Mike Dennehy Boulay, our presenting sponsor for our primary coverage that evening. Brad Card, Alicia Preston Xanthopoulos. We have great contributors. Matthew Bartlett, Michael Graham. Will get him to call in from New Hampshire Journal. We're going to have a bunch of people locally and nationally, some of the best minds reading the results. And that's 2 weeks from today. Back with Eversource and some storm prep next on Good Morning New Hampshire, the pulse of an age. Other news this morning. Well, people are looking at Iowa and New Hampshire. Federal judges hearing key arguments on whether or not former President Donald Trump is presidential immunity to charges that he allegedly tried to overturn the last election results. So that's happening. And I believe the Trump team's going to be making arguments that the president is immune, the former president. And of course, the special prosecutor will be arguing that he's not. Could have some implications. We're going to come back to some of the politics of the day in the news talk. Going to switch gears, though. I just talked about Mother Nature moving in here, and someone who looks at this very carefully. I haven't had him on a while. I'd love to get him back on our show now that we're on so many news talk stations. William Henkel with Eversource joining us. Good morning, New Hampshire. This Tuesday morning, the pulse of an H. William, thanks for being with us. You're sending out some alerts to customers. You're doing preps. What do you expect? You work closely on the forecast side of things tonight and tomorrow with these winds and heavy rains and a lot of snow that's already here. Mhm. Now, I know it's almost like asking one of our friends from VSiN Sports, the wild card games this weekend, who's gonna win? I know it's impossible, but you look at this carefully. If you had to guess, you and your colleagues at Eversource, you think we're gonna have sort of scattered power outages potentially over the next 12, 24, 36 hours, or are you concerned that they could be bigger? I mean, do you have a sense on that, or does it really depend on the how strong the wind gusts actually are, where they happen, how much snows there, how much rain comes? Right. Yeah, especially, because I know this firsthand. We've had some trees taken down where you just had to because you could tell the tree was older and, parts of it were rotting. It takes one gust, right? And a big tree in an area, and all of a sudden you get a neighborhood, you get a grid, you get something. Again, is this going to be more of a morning thing if you had to say William Hinkle with Eversource, early morning, late night, early morning hours? What are you forecasting? Right. But I did notice that some of the wind gusts, especially on the coast or different areas, could stick around tomorrow, even as the storm passes through. William Hinkle, again, best way if people want to learn more. Again, if they have power, obviously things can charge and last a while. If they're going online, if they want to report something, what's the best protocol there? William Hinkle, Eversource, thanks so much for the time. Good morning, New Hampshire, the Pulse of an H. We'll catch you soon, maybe tomorrow. Who knows? Thank you. All right, a lot going on this morning as we get going, and it's interesting. I expected some polls out. I'm going to be more interested to hear from St. Anselm Institute of Politics later this week. I think they have a poll coming out. Neil Levesque, executive director, had said that I think the other day. This UNH poll, could the governor Sununu talked about. Of course, if you want to see a tight race here, then you like these polls. But polls, I got to tell you, they you look for trends. You look for trends, right? Because these polls, I've seen them nationally, nationally talking about presidential elections, and more often than not, for some reason, I don't know, I'm not a pollster, I'm not a surveying expert. Um, uh, the uh, the polls are not accurate, but what they do is they pick up trends. And I will say this, and if you listen to the show on a regular basis, which we appreciate, I appreciate it very much. I've been saying for quite some time, J Dog, you've heard me say it even in the summer, fall months when they started tracking our primary, which is now just 2 weeks from today. 2 weeks from today, buckle up, as Brad Card would say. Here we go. 2 weeks from today the good news for Donald Trump in the past polls. The good news for Donald Trump is he has a really big poll lead here in New Hampshire. The bad news for Donald Trump, and this is months ago, he has a really big poll lead here. What I'm trying to say, if you use the analogy of professional sports in the National Football League, wild card weekend coming up, you go into a big game, AFC championship game. You're predicted to win. You get into the first quarter, the second quarter, and you have a 30-point lead. But then you go into halftime. Would you rather have the 30-point lead in the second quarter before the half or with 2 minutes to go in the football game? I think the answer is pretty clear to most people. So the question's gonna be, it's about time. It's all about time. That's the thing about life. It's about time. 2 weeks to go. If the trends are that Nikki Haley is trimming this lead, if she's moving and Donald Trump's not moving, Neil Levesque, not me, give credit to Neil, Institute of Politics, St. A's. He's used the line that Trump's like a goalpost, speaking of the NFL. So I guess I can use the NFL as an analogy since Levesque did. He's like a goalpost. His number stays steady in the field. You know Trump's going to get that number. He's going to get a solid number. Here's the wild card, folks. You can complicate this all you want, but I'm going to really simplify. Here's the wild card. Independent undeclared voters, do they take part in this Republican primary? Yes or no? Governor Sununu says they're going to, like 40% or more. That makes these polls a very close race. Trump, the goalpost, solid, firm like concrete with his supporters, as you know. But if that number doesn't move and Nikki Haley is gaining steam, where's she getting that support? Where's she getting? And with 2 weeks to go, is there enough time for her to catch or beat Donald Trump here in New Hampshire? And then the other question on the Democrat side, how many Democrats are doing handstands, jumping up and down, excited, doing calisthenics to run out and write in Joe Biden? I don't know. I'm not feeling it. Are you? Good morning, New Hampshire. The Pulse 78603-228-2080. Back with the show on this Tuesday in a moment. Wow, it's gonna be an interesting close here, as they say. 2 weeks is moving pretty quick, but you know what? There's time. You know what can happen. Michael Graham's tracking it all. He's an early explorer. No, he's not. He's tracking it all. New Hampshire Journal, nhjournal.com, nhjournal.com. Let's let's start with Governor Sununu's interview this morning. Do you think more than 40% of undeclared, sort of non-traditional Republican voters are going to vote in the primary, presidential primary 2 weeks from today? What do you think, Mr. Graham? Seriously, what do you think's gonna What about Iowa? It's so hard to tell. So hard to tell. Governor Sununu was on saying the crowds for Nikki Haley are bigger than he thought, bigger than the campaign. But he said two people said they're going to win Iowa caucus process. Obviously, only one will. Trump and DeSantis. What about Iowa? Big surprise coming or not? Well, let, okay, yep. See, I don't, but that's me. The last point. Not no no no. Hold on. Not everything else. No, no. I think it's apples and oranges. What I'm saying is, I don't think there's any transference at all. I just haven't seen it over the years. I'm not going off anything else. I've not seen anything that happens in Iowa that impacts New Hampshire. I think it's a different ball game myself. I may be wrong, but I want to turn it on you a little bit because you're from South Carolina. If Nikki Haley basically makes it a photo finish here, let's just say for fun, she actually edges Trump by 1 or 2 points. That's an upset. That's a big upset given the leads he's had. And then it go now what Donald Trump's turning the heat on. Obviously, Nikki Haley's been coming on. So you've seen the attack ads going back at Nikki Haley. So everything from China to gas tax. I mean, I could keep going. The border. So say Trump doesn't do what he wants in New Hampshire, does what he wants in Iowa, doesn't do what he wants in New Hampshire. Then it goes on a month later, South Carolina. You know that state. Does Nikki Haley have an upper hand there or not? And what will Trump say about New Hampshire's primary? I mean, he obviously won't be happy. He'll trash it if he doesn't win. I'm saying, what does he say? And what happens in South Carolina? All right, Michael Graham. We'll see. 2 weeks to go from today. 2 weeks. Thank you, Michael. And don't remember, and Michael, don't forget, please. It's detrimental for Democrats to vote in our primary. Well, no, I think it's funny when you talk about democracy in action and voting and elections, and then you want to suppress. You don't want your own party to vote in our first in the nation presidential primary, which apparently means squat to some of these Democrats, some New Hampshire who have legacy here. By the way, I mean Ann Custer's family or mom. I mean, you would think you'd be pretty proud about New Hampshire's voting participation, taking part in our primary, supporting our primary, but I guess not. All right. All right, coming up, we're going to tell you about the New England Boat Show and a whole lot more. Back on Good Morning Hampshire, the Pulse of an H in a moment.